Samuel Taylor Coleridge lived between 1772 and 1834, was a major romantic poet, also known for his prose work on literature, religion, and the organization of the society. He was the 10th and the last child of the vicar of Ottery St. Mary near Exeter. His amazing memory and his engagement to imbibe knowledge and his immersion in the classics turn him into a classical scholar of unknown ability by the time he entered Jesus College, Cambridge in 1791. He felt great enthusiasm for life and for French Revolution. Plagued by deaths, Coleridge enlisted in the Light Dragons in December 1793. Next year he returned to Cambridge, but he left in December, however, without taking a degree because of his erratic and impulsive character and behavior and his friendship with Robert Southey. Both disliked the new classical tradition and were radicals in politics. On October 4, 1795, Coleridge married Sarah Fricker, the sister of Southey's wife Tibby. In spite of his usually wretched health, the year from 1795 to 1802 were for Coleridge a period of fast poetic growth and intellectual maturation. The Elodian Harp published his poems on various subjects in 1796 was his unique contribution to the growth of English Romantic poetry. The blending of lyrical and descriptive fusion with philosophical rumination in truly symbolic poetry. Ode to the Departing Years shows revolutionary fervor. His interest in philosophy and religion was soon in the form of religious musing published in 1796. They were seen in the form of this publication. He aimed to redefine Orthodox Christianity. The most influential event in Coleridge's career was his intimacy with William Wordsworth and Dorothy Wordsworth, in whose neighborhood he spent most of his life from 1796 to 1810. The friendship was partly responsible for his Anna Millay, was published in Anna Mobis, that was published in 1798, which culminated in the joint publication with Wordsworth of the Lyrical Ballads in September 1798. As against 19 poems by Wordsworth, the volume contained only 4 by Coleridge, but one of these poems was The Ancient Mariner, that deals with the themes of sin, punishment, and of redemption through suffering and a loving appreciation of nature. While Wordsworth was together the charm of novelty, things of everyday life, Coleridge's endeavor was or should be directed to persons and characters supernatural or at least romantic. A second and large edition of Coleridge's poems also appeared in 1798. It contained further lyrical and symbolic work, each as The Lime Tree Bower, The Prison, and The Fears in Solitude, All the time Coleridge also wrote, at the same time Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan, perhaps one of his most famous of his poem, and began the ambitious narrative piece called Crucible. So Kubla Khan, or a vision in a dream, Coleridge. Kubla Khan, written in 1797, is a lyric made up of fragments of vision and comment on the loss of the rest of the vision. The term fragment implies Coleridge perhaps did regard his poem as in some way unified. Perhaps the visitor from Porlock deserved thanks for what he did when he disturbed his vision. The first three stanzas are products of pure imagination. The pleasure dome of Kubla Khan is a metaphor for the unbuilt monument of imagination, a descriptive act. In the fourth, the speaker says that he once had a vision of the damsel singing of Mount Abora. This vision becomes a metaphor for Coleridge's vision of 300-line masterpiece he never completed. The speaker insists that if he could only revive within him her symphony and song, he would recreate the pleasure dome out of music and words and take on the persona of the magician or a visionary. The closing lines of the poem represents a memory of the dream, and that the figure with the flashing eyes and floating hair is a reminder of the vision. The flashing eye and the floating hair are the sign that he had eaten divine food, that is, he was feeling a divine inspiration. In fact, Coleridge was experiencing the widening of the limits of space and time, as he describes caverns measureless to man, and the forests ancient as. The first two stanzas are written in tetrameter with a rhyme scheme of A B A A B C C D E E D E. The third stanza tightens into tetrameter and rhymes A B A B C C. The fourth stanza continues the tetrameter of the third, and the rhyme scheme is A B C C B D F D F G R R G H H. And Kubla hears a message from the remote past, ancestral voices prophesying war, some kind of a disturbance. So the poem is divided into three irregular stanzas, more loosely between different times and places. It's vastly different in style from other poems written by Coleridge. The first stanza of the poem describes Khan's pleasure dome built alongside a sacred river fed by a powerful fountain. The second stanza of the poem is the narrator's response to the power and effects of an Abyssinian Maid song, which entraps him and captures him, but leaves him unable to act on her inspiration unless he could hear her once again. Together they form a comparison of creative power that is harmonious with nature. The third and the final stanza shifts to first person's perspective of the speaker, detailing his sighting of the women playing a dulcimer. And if he could revive her song, he could fill the pleasure dome with music and words. He concludes by describing a hypothetical audience reaction to the song in the language of religious ecstasy. The book Coleridge was reading before he fell asleep was Purkha's His Pilgrimage, or Relationship of the World and religion observed in all ages and places, discovered from the creation to the present by English clergyman and geographer Samuel Purchas. Published in 1613, the book contained a brief description of Zandu, the summer capital of Mughal ruler Kubla Khan, although the land is one of the man-made pleasure dome, there is a natural sacred river the, that runs past it. The lines describing the river have markedly different rhythm from the rest of the passage. The land is constructed as a garden, but like Eden, like man's fall, Zandu is isolated by walls. The finite properties of the constructed wall of Zandu are contrasted with the infinite properties of the natural caves through which the river runs. The poem expands on the Gothic hints of the first stanza as the narrator explores the dark chasm in the middle of Zandu garden and describes the surrounding area as both savage and holy. Yarnett interprets this chasm as symbolic of the poet struggling with decadence that ignores nature. So it may also represent the dark side of the soul, the dehumanizing effect of the power and dominion. Fountains are often symbolic of the inception of life, and the cave may represent forceful creativity. So reading the text in Zandu, did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure decree whereas the sacred river ran through caravan measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and there where God bright with sinuous rills were blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hill and folding sunny spots of greenery. So the opening stanza is a description of the city and its surrounding. The speaker described the stately pleasure dome built in Zandu according to the decree of Kubla Khan, the place where Alps, the sacred river, ran through caravan measureless to man. Kubla Khan might be the Godhead in eternity, and the blossoming landscape of it might be a paradise, but whether he is potentially divine or demonic as an image in the context of the poem, Kubla Khan occupies actively limited place. He is named only twice in the poem. The second time, circumstances that make him anything but godlike in power. Actual functions, as will be seen, is to prepare the way for the role of the poet in stanza 3. Zandu appears to be conventional image of a paradise, earthly or heavenly, but it may be limited to the simple poetical description of a garden, sometime like the garden of Zandu with the stately pleasure dome. In their midst, such a scene may include a building of some kind. 4 lines only, 1 to 2. In Zandu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure decree. And lines 6 and 7, so twice 5 miles of the fertile ground with walls and towers with girded round echo the passage quoted, and they are closer in some respect to the actual text of Purchas. His pilgrimage, Kubla Khan, the pleasure dome, the river, the cavern, the underground sea, 5 of the 6 images that are to take part in the events of the next stanzas are introduced briefly in the first 5 lines. With the exception of the line 3 and 5, then stanza 1 is a paraphrase, an elaboration of the passage quoted from Purkas. Stanzas 1 and 2 are joined by a continuity of landscape, but in line 12 to 14, the second world of savage nature is already metaphor for the mind of the dreamer, which now becomes a major part of the vision. In stanza 1, the two ultimate extremes are represented by the two chief images of status. Purka's Kubla Khan himself, secluded in his pleasure dome park by girding walls and towers as though in a fortress, and the sunless far below in the deepest reservoir of the dream's unconscious. So possibly it's the image of the poet himself in a dream world, in the world of vision. Continuing the text, but oh, the deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a sylvan cover, a savage place as holy and enchanted as ever beneath. A waning moon was haunted by women wailing for her demon lover, and from this chasm with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amidst whose swift, half intermittent bursts huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail or chafy grain beneath the thresh's frail, and mid these the dancing rock at once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river. So this stanza is a description of the chasm, possibly which is the metaphor for the romantic imagination. The very different scene described in the first part of the stanza to the deep romantic chasm with its tree-covered slopes, the mighty fountain bursting out of the seething earth, and the sacred river flowing out from the fountain belongs more recognizably to the poetry of Coleridge's own time, and it offers a better clue to what happens during the vision. The chasm shows the relationship of mirror-like reflection and affinity between the external nature and the human mind. The operation of the mind is expressed by action peculiar to nature. The total landscape is in cross-section from Kubla's pleasure round through the chasm to the cavern, and underground sea is at once the content of the vision in a dream, and a pictorial diagram, a pictorial representation of the operation of the dreamer's mind, during which he experiences a vision or a dream. More precisely, the landscape with its descending level would be the mind as the structure, and the process within it summed up in the flowing of the river meandering with a mazy motion. The activity of the mind with the creative deity. The fountain, the Kubla Khan, is convenient metaphorical and a metaphor for the finite mind of the dreamer, where a new world in miniature is soon to be created out of the materials of the vision itself. It is a ready analogue of the measureless font of divinity. For good reason, the place in which it resists and rises is called holy and enchanted, and the river that falls from it sacred, and since the ultimate product of the creative process that is going on in the dream vision is to be a visual image, hailed by exclamation the living power. If the fountain corresponds to the imagination, its primary as to the river flung up by it correspond to the secondary imagination. According to Coleridge definition, the characteristic action of the secondary imagination is that it dissolves, diffuses, dissipates in order to recreate. It is just such an action that occurs in the closing line of the stanza. So this poem is actually a replica of what goes in the mind of the poet at the moment of creation. Continuing with the text, 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion through woods and dale, the sacred river ran, then reached the cave, measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the mountain and the cave. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. So in these lines, the river follows the same course as in line number 3 to 5 on what must be understood as a second circuit, since the fountain erupts in pulses, being momentarily forced out of the seething earth, and the river momentarily is flung up from the fountain. There is an implication of cycles of creative energy swelling and subsiding. So the whole of this descriptive passage that repeats some of the line is nothing but a picture of what goes within the mind at the time of creativity. Since Coleridge considered the reconciling and meditatory power, it is the fountain that a river should be associated with the reconciliation and meditation in stanza 2. The commotion of the river's descent into the sea is nothing but the unconscious mind, now called a lifeless ocean, which crosses the distant line, whole dream landscape to reach the hearing of Kubla carries with it by means of an element totally new to the vision, warning of the greater disturbances to come in the form of the prophecy. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The war they prophesy is a threat of conflict, invasion, and destruction to both the vision that has been folding and the dream that frames it as the most valuable image in the vision, because among the borrowed element he is the least capable of being assimilated. The sleeping mind that contains them, Kubla Khan is the most likely to receive the threat. After his brief return, he is not referring to it again, yet although the whole vision in a dream is threatened by the awakening of destructive forces in the unconscious, the process of reconciliation of opposite moves on to its conclusion. Mind and its content are indissolubly united. In line 31 to 36, after the sacred river and Kubla Khan both have been eliminated from the scene, the remaining images from both world and from the chasm between them are enclosed, are relocated and recombined into a succession of new and unexpected pairing. Each pair of images marking an increasingly close conjunction of opposite. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the wave. Here both images have lost their concreteness, the dome having become hardly more than a reflection, and the ocean having been reduced to generalized waves in some unspecified central region corresponding to the earlier chasm. The two are loosely juxtaposed. Comparative power, which is suspended during ordinary sleep, further the intrusion by the ancestral voices implies that the outer dream comes to an end at just the moment when the imaginative or imaginations come into its full command of the vision. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was Abyssinian Maid, and on a dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Bora. Could I revive with me her symphony and song to such a deep delight it would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice. So the speaker mentions a woman wailing for her demon lover. In a deep romantic chasm, she wails for the absence of her demon lover. Her desolation and grief heighten the poem's exotic mood. Next, there is a vision of an Abyssinian maid, muse-like, playing a dulcimer and singing of Mount Abora, a place located in Amara region of modern Ethiopia, formerly known as the Abyssinian Empire. It was the damsel herself that the poet originally saw, but he must revive in himself. What he must revive in himself is only a part of the vision, her symphony and song. Coleridge expresses a desire to revive the vision to the extent that it could transport him back to the pleasure dome, and frustration that that's not possible now because his vision has been disturbed. The relation of this stanza to the two preceding lines, it lies precisely in the difference between unconscious mental activity and the conscious one, between the spontaneity and the autonomy of the creative faculty during sleep or reverie, and the voluntary control that govern them under the normal condition of waking composition. Whereas Kubla Khan could decree the original pleasure dome, command that it be constructed by someone else, the speaker here would more directly build his poetic counterpart of it, expressing his will as a conscious action of his own. He is seeking not merely to emulate Purka's Oriental emperor, but to surpass him, and not merely to recapture spontaneous vision, but to bring it into existence according to a preconceived plan. Just as Kubla Khan's dream was given reality by building of the pleasure dome, so the vision of Kubla Khan's pleasure dome is to be given reality by the composition of the poem, by the poet himself. Also, the return of the dome and caves image similarly implies action by the secondary imagination. And the closing stanza, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware. His flashing eyes, his floating hair weaves a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey dew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. So this actually is the image of the inspired poet who has seen the divine vision because he was inspired by the Abyssinian maid. So Kubla Khan is the romantic poem in which the audience has a function in the creative process itself, carrying on the progression to perception once more. Even this is not the last step. The listener would move from hearing and seeing to making an utterance of their own, which occupy the remainder of the stanza. From memory to dream to poem to poet, the culminating vision in Kubla Khan, the final product of the corrected creative process, thus is to be a vision of the poet himself, which his poetry will enable his audience to behold directly in the last step of all, as he is made visible to his own prophecy. The poet is received in a terror and a reverence by his imagined audience, for whom the vision of his power is as much a religious experience, because the lines are close your eyes with holy dread, as an experience of art. When the creative process has been repeated, corrected, and transcended, the pattern of the progressively heightened vision will come to an end with a double extinction of the vision in the organs of the sight itself, the flashing eyes of the bard, whose gaze is turned inward, absorbed in his own activity, and the piously closed eyes of the audience, and like wedding guests listening to the ancient mariner, transform the bard's experience into knowledge of their own, for he on honeydew had fed, the paradise is their interference, and through them he his also the poet's visionary power is seeing the maid, which is the wisdom and an inspiration, drawing him to herself, grace through the Abyssinian maid playing before the poet, amuse him in a strong desire, a hunger and a thirst after her vision, symphony and song, so that out of the deep delight of love with which will accrue, he will be able to express what is still unformed with music loud and long, and thereby build a paradise. Psychologically speaking, the mind is having a continuity activity in the moment of inspiration. It's having bright ideas, but only some of the bright ideas are picked up from the unconscious working of the mind by the conscious activity and given the form of composition. So this whole process has been described in a metaphorical language in this poem. Now, summing up Kubla Khan, the audience weaves a circle, an anglical dance round him thrice, to signify their acknowledgement of his threefold sanctity: love, the expression of love, and his experience of paradise. They close their eyes with holy dread or reverence, the senses of love and fear. This harmony of hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and feeling is the true intellectual life realized by the reader. As for the background of this poem is concerned, Kubla, also known as the Emperor Suzhou of Yuan, was the fifth Khan of the Mughal Empire, reigning from 1260 to 1294. The most prominent and arguably most influential component of Kubla Khan's early life was his study and a strong attraction to the contemporary Chinese culture. Kublai or Kubla invited Huan, the leading Buddhist monk in North China, to his Odo in Mongolia. Kubla was attracted by the abilities of the Tibetan monks as a healer too, and He patronized Muslim scholars and scientists, and Muslim astronomers contributed to the construction of the observatory in Singhai. Kubla was also a prolific writer of Chinese poetry. Though most of his work have not survived, only one Chinese poem written by him is included in the selection of Yuan poetry, titled Inspiration, recorded while enjoying the ascent to the Spring Mountain. It is that one in spring Kubla Khan went to worship at a Buddhist temple at the Summer Palace in western Kabli, that's Beijing now, and on his way back and ascended Odli hill Tuman near Ulu in Mongolia, where he was filled with inspiration and wrote this poem. He also founded the Yuan dynasty in China as a conquest dynasty in 1271 and ruled as the first Yuan emperor until his death in 1294. Kubla was driven by the unrealized dream of his grandfather, the fearsome conqueror Genghis Khan, who desired to unite the whole of China under Mughal rule. Kubla Khan, the subduing China was one thing, but ruling it would be another. It would require a delicate balancing act of appealing to his new Chinese subject while maintaining the Mughal loyalty. Kublai or Kubla Khan considered China his main base, realizing within a decade of his enthronement as a great Khan that he needed to concentrate on governing there. For the beginning of his reign, he adopted Chinese political and cultural model and wanted to minimize the influence of religious and regional lord who had held immense power before and during the Song dynasty. So, like Kubla, possibly, Coleridge needs the same kind of heavenly inspiration. Thank you.